It began with a child, a tree, and a moment of innocent laughter. No one knew that a simple afternoon of play would spiral into a legal nightmare, one that would go viral, spark national outrage, and make people across America question, have HOAs gone too far? If you've ever heard of a story so absurd you had to double-check it was real, this is one of those. And by the end, you'll understand why thousands of people flooded social media in disbelief. So, if you care about fairness, freedom, or just want to see how one magnolia tree turned a quiet neighborhood upside down, stay tuned. And hey, while you're here, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below, because this story deserves to be heard. The neighborhood was the kind you'd see in a Florida postcard: sunlit lawns, freshly painted fences, and streets so clean they almost looked artificial. It was peaceful, predictable, and meticulously managed by the local homeowners association, known to residents simply as the HOA. Among the pastel-colored houses stood a small but lively home belonging to a single mother and her 5-year-old son. She worked long hours but always made time to be with him. Their front yard had one defining feature: a beautiful magnolia tree that stretched its green branches like open arms over the lawn. To her son, it wasn't just a tree. It was a spaceship, a fortress, a jungle, and a hiding place, all rolled into one. Every day after preschool, he would dash outside, giggling as he played beneath its leaves. To any passerby, it was an innocent, heartwarming sight. But in the world of HOA regulations, even innocence can become a violation. For years, life had been simple. The HOA rarely interfered. A few reminders about garbage bins, lawn trimming, or the community pool rules, but nothing out of the ordinary. The mother had never missed a payment or broken a rule. That changed one bright October afternoon in 2025. She opened her mailbox and noticed a white envelope stamped with the HOA's official seal. At first, she thought it was a routine community update. But as she unfolded the letter, her expression froze. Across the top, bold and formal, were the words: "Notice of violation, public nuisance/property damage." Her first thought was, this has to be a mistake. She read on. The notice claimed that her 5-year-old son had been seen interacting with community landscaping, specifically touching and climbing the magnolia tree and handling a decorative rock. Then came the line that made her hands tremble. Your child's actions constitute a violation of community rules and have created a public nuisance. At the bottom, another blow. You are hereby assessed $382 in legal fees associated with this violation notice. She stared at the number in disbelief. Her son, just 5 years old, was now labeled a public nuisance by her own neighborhood. Trying to make sense of the nonsense, she took a deep breath, sat at her kitchen table, and read the letter again, trying to understand. There had to be some misunderstanding. Maybe someone confused her son with another child. Maybe the HOA had sent the wrong notice. She drafted a polite email to the HOA board, explaining that her son was simply playing near their own front yard and hadn't caused any harm to the tree or property. She even included a picture of the magnolia, healthy, untouched, and still standing tall. Hours later, she got a reply. Per community regulations, residents and their guests are prohibited from climbing or interacting with HOA-maintained landscaping. Repeated observation of your child's conduct has been documented. Please remit the associated legal fee within 10 business days. The words "repeated observation" made her uneasy. Who had been documenting her child's playtime? Someone, somewhere, had been watching. When rules forget humanity. The more she thought about it, the more absurd it seemed. Rules exist to maintain peace, but peace loses meaning when it forgets compassion. The HOA's regulations were meant to prevent damage to community property, yes, but this wasn't vandalism, graffiti, or destruction. This was a child playing with a tree. Across America, countless families live under HOAs. And while some associations are fair and balanced, others develop reputations for micromanagement, issuing fines for holiday lights, flower pots, or even children's chalk drawings on sidewalks. But this was different. It targeted a child for something every parent would consider normal, even beautiful. And when that line is crossed, what begins as neighborhood order turns into something that feels a lot like power abuse. Her friends told her to ignore it. Don't make it worse, they said. But she couldn't let it go. It wasn't about $382 anymore. It was about principle. It was about protecting her son's right to just be a kid. That evening, she stood by the magnolia tree, watching her little boy trace his fingers along its smooth bark. The sun dipped low, painting the leaves gold. She felt anger, confusion, and something deeper, resolve. If the HOA wanted to label her son a public nuisance, then the world needed to see what that nuisance really looked like, a happy child playing under a tree. That night, she turned on her phone camera. Her voice was calm, but her message was powerful. She held up the notice and said, "My 5-year-old has been called a public nuisance by our HOA for touching a tree. They're demanding I pay $382 in legal fees. Is this what we've come to?" Her tone wasn't angry. It was heartbroken, confused, and tired of unreasonable authority. Her son's laughter echoed faintly in the background. It was a moment of pure truth, and the internet loves truth. When she hit post, she didn't expect much. Maybe a few friends would see it. Maybe some kind words of support. But what happened next would go far beyond that. In just a few hours, the video began spreading like wildfire. People from across Florida started commenting, then across the U.S. Then news outlets picked it up. The story of the Magnolia Tree Incident became the latest in a long line of viral HOA horror stories. What had started as a quiet frustration between one mother and one HOA president was now becoming a national debate about power, control, and the loss of common sense in American communities. The Florida mom had no idea how big this would get, or how many people it would inspire to speak out about their own HOA experiences. Because what began under a magnolia tree was about to grow into something much, much larger. It all began with a laugh. Not the kind of laugh that fills stadiums or screens, but the small, pure kind. The kind that belongs only to children. It echoed softly through a quiet Florida street one sunny afternoon. The magnolia tree swayed gently in the breeze, its leaves glinting under the warm October light. The boy, just 5 years old, stood beneath its wide canopy, clutching a small toy car in his hand. To him, the magnolia wasn't just a tree, it was the center of his little universe. The way its branches stretched toward the sky made it feel alive, like a giant friend watching over him. He'd climb onto its lower roots, press his tiny palms against its rough bark, and giggle when the wind brushed through its leaves, as if the tree itself was laughing back. His mother often watched from the porch, coffee cup in hand, smiling. To her, those moments were the highlight of the day. The laughter, the innocence, the simplicity, everything that defined childhood. Little did she know, that same joy would soon be turned against them. The Florida community they lived in was clean, calm, and quiet, a place where every home looked nearly identical. Green lawns, beige paint, and matching mailboxes lined the streets like a real estate brochure. This uniform beauty was no accident. It was the work of the Homeowners Association, a group of residents, led by a president, that enforced rules on everything from fence height to flower color. When the mother first moved in, she thought it was harmless. "It keeps things organized," she told her sister once. "It's nice that everyone follows the same standards." But she'd also heard stories, rumors of the HOA being overly strict, of residents fined for kids' bicycles left on sidewalks or garden decorations that didn't match community aesthetics. She'd never paid much attention. After all, she followed every rule. At least she thought she did. It started innocently enough. One afternoon, as her son played by the magnolia tree, she noticed a man across the street standing by his car, watching. He wasn't a stranger. She recognized him as the HOA president, a middle-aged man known for his strict interpretations of the rulebook. He stood there for a few moments, phone in hand, typing something. Then he got into his car and drove off. She didn't think much of it. Maybe he was texting. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Life went on. But that was the moment, the first spark, that set the entire Magnolia Tree Incident into motion. Somewhere between the laughter of a child and the quiet disapproval of an HOA president, a conflict was born. A few days later, the mother would come to learn that her son's laughter had been reported, documented, as the HOA later called it. Apparently, he had been seen multiple times interacting with community property. But here's the catch: the Magnolia Tree wasn't on a public lot. It was right beside their yard, on a patch of grass maintained jointly by the HOA but accessible to every homeowner on the street. In most neighborhoods, no one would even question a child playing there. Yet for this HOA, the line between maintenance and ownership blurred, and they chose to see a rule where there should have been reason. Somewhere in a binder of community bylaws, there existed a line about no interaction with shared landscaping. A rule likely written years ago to prevent damage. A rule never meant for a 5-year-old boy. But rules, in the wrong hands, can lose their purpose. Every day after school, the boy's routine stayed the same: backpack off, shoes untied, and straight outside. The mother would often record short clips of him playing, not for social media, but for memories. One particular clip showed him standing under the magnolia, whispering to it as if it were alive. "Hi, tree," he said, patting the bark. "Do you think I can climb you someday?" It was the kind of moment any parent would treasure, that pure, unfiltered curiosity children have for the world. To her, the magnolia was a symbol of stability, something that stayed strong through every storm. She loved that her son saw beauty in it. What she didn't know was that this same tree had become the silent witness to something much darker: a neighborhood's obsession with control. After the violation notice arrived, neighbors began whispering. Some sympathized quietly, offering supportive smiles from across the street. Others avoided eye contact. In HOA communities, conflict spreads fast, faster than news itself. The mother started noticing subtle shifts: the neighbor who stopped waving, the one who cut conversations short, the uneasy glances. It was as if the simple act of defending her child had turned her into an outsider. And yet, she couldn't help but wonder, didn't anyone else see how absurd this was? How had people become so afraid of standing up to a system that was clearly overstepping? That weekend, she sat with her son under the magnolia tree. He didn't understand what was happening, only that his mom seemed upset. He picked up a small rock, the same one mentioned in the violation notice, and handed it to her. "Can you keep it safe for me?" he asked. She smiled faintly, trying not to cry. "Of course I can." To anyone else, it was just a rock, but to her, it became a symbol. A reminder that sometimes the smallest things carry the biggest meanings. Because this wasn't about property or landscaping anymore. It was about innocence being replaced by paperwork. It was about humanity being buried under legal terminology. As days passed, the tension grew heavier. The HOA sent another reminder, the same $382 demand, the same cold language. That night, she made a choice. She sat at her kitchen table, letter in hand, and said to herself, "If they want to make this public, then let the public see it." She opened her phone camera, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. She didn't name-call, she didn't insult, she just told the truth. The truth about how her 5-year-old had been labeled a nuisance. The truth about how a tree had become a symbol of something much larger, the loss of reason in the name of regulation. She hit upload. And within hours, her phone began to buzz. Then it didn't stop. Comments flooded in: "This is insane. How can they do this to a kid? HOAs have lost their minds." The video had started to go viral. The magnolia tree, once just part of a peaceful neighborhood, was now a national symbol of HOA overreach. The mother's story was spreading across TikTok, X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. People began sharing their own HOA nightmares. Some had been fined for kids' toys left outside, others for mismatched curtains. But none could believe what happened here: a 5-year-old punished for being a child. And as the story grew, so did the outrage. The Florida mother didn't know it yet, but her stand, and that single magnolia tree, was about to shake the very foundation of HOA culture across America. Because sometimes, the smallest voices, even a child's laugh, can spark the loudest conversations. It's strange how a single sheet of paper can flip an entire life upside down. No shouting, no confrontation, just printed words and a signature at the bottom. But in those words, there was power. Power that could shame, frighten, and silence. For this Florida mother, the letter from her HOA wasn't just paper. It was a weapon, written in the language of authority, coded in formality, and delivered with precision. At first, she thought it was an error. But the deeper she read, the clearer it became. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional. The letter began with an official header, Homeowners Association Compliance Department, followed by her address and the subject line that immediately made her heart drop. Notice of violation, public nuisance, and property damage. It sounded serious, like something that belonged in a courtroom, not a family mailbox. The wording was cold, almost robotic, yet designed to intimidate. It stated that her minor dependent had been observed engaging in repeated disruptive behavior, specifically touching, climbing, and otherwise interacting with association-maintained flora and decorative stones. The next line was almost surreal. This conduct constitutes a public nuisance as defined under Section 4B of the Community Regulations. She stopped reading for a moment, stunned. Public nuisance? A 5-year-old? For touching a tree? Then came the demand. In accordance with our bylaws, the association hereby assesses $382 in legal and administrative fees related to the documentation and issuance of this notice. Legal fees. Not damages, not repairs. Legal fees. For sending this letter. It was absurd, but written in such formal, intimidating language that it made her question her own judgment. Was she missing something? Could this actually be legal? What made the letter so unsettling wasn't just what it said, it was how it said it. Every line was crafted to sound official, serious, and final. Words like hereby, violation, assessment, and compliance transformed a simple misunderstanding into a matter of authority. Letters like these are meant to do one thing: intimidate. They thrive on the idea that most people won't fight back, that they'll comply quietly just to avoid conflict. But this mother was different. She wasn't angry at first. She was confused. Then, the confusion turned into disbelief. And disbelief into resolve. She decided to study the letter word by word, paragraph by paragraph, and what she found shocked her even more. The letter cited Section 4B, public nuisance, a clause buried deep in the HOA's rulebook. When she found it, the wording was vague. Any resident or guest engaging in behavior that interferes with the peaceful enjoyment of community property or causes damage to shared landscaping shall be subject to disciplinary action and assessed appropriate legal fees. That was it. No examples. No limits. No context. It was the kind of rule that could mean anything or nothing. And that's what made it dangerous. There was no actual damage to the tree, no complaint from neighbors, no evidence of harm. Only an assumption, made by one person, the HOA president, that a child's touch equaled disruption. That assumption became accusation. And that accusation became a fine. In many communities, the HOA president holds near absolute authority. They enforce the rules, issue warnings, and decide when to escalate cases to legal notice. It's a system built on volunteer leadership, but often it turns into personal power. The president of this Florida HOA was known to be strict. Residents whispered stories of past incidents. A family fined for planting unapproved flowers, another for leaving Halloween decorations up too long. But this was different. This was the first time anyone had ever seen a child accused of being a rule breaker. And when the mother realized that the president had personally signed the notice, her patience ended. She decided to write back. Her email was calm, composed, and firm. She didn't attack. She simply asked for clarity. Can you please specify what rule has been broken and what actual damage has occurred? My son is 5 years old and was under my supervision at all times. She ended it with a simple line. This feels deeply unfair. 2 days later, the HOA replied. Our decision stands. The rule applies to all residents equally. Future violations may result in further action. That was the breaking point. Equal? What kind of equality treats a kindergartner like a criminal? She realized there was no reasoning left, no space for empathy, just policy. And so, she did what no one else in that neighborhood had dared to do. She took the story public. When she posted the letter online, she blurred the address and names, but kept the content visible. Within hours, it began spreading. People couldn't believe it was real. Some thought it was satire, a joke about overzealous HOAs. But when local news outlets confirmed it, disbelief turned to outrage. Screenshots of the letter were shared across platforms with captions like, "This is why people hate HOAs. A 5-year-old is not a public nuisance. This is beyond ridiculous." The more people read the letter, the more absurd it sounded. Its stiff legal tone became a meme. TikTok creators reenacted it with dramatic voices, mocking the phrase, "touching community flora." But behind the humor was anger, real, collective anger at the system that allowed this to happen. Within 3 days, local reporters showed up at the neighborhood. Cameras rolled, microphones extended, and questions flew. Do you think this was an overreaction? Was there actual damage to the tree? Have you spoken to the HOA president since? The mother answered calmly, never once losing her composure. "My son didn't harm anyone or anything," she said. "He was playing outside. If that's a violation, then something's wrong with the rules, not with us." Her words resonated. They were simple but powerful. Soon, national media picked up the story. Morning shows discussed it. Legal experts debated it. Even comedians joked about it, calling it the Great Magnolia Scandal. The letter that started as a neighborhood threat had now become a public embarrassment for the HOA. The HOA president tried to defend the action. In an email to reporters, he stated, "The rules are in place for the safety and preservation of our community property. Enforcement is impartial and applies equally to all residents." But his justification only made things worse. The internet exploded with sarcastic comments. "Yes, protect the tree from the 5-year-old menace. Can we start a GoFundMe for the traumatized Magnolia?" Public sentiment was clear. The HOA had gone too far. What they didn't expect was how far the backlash would go next. The same tool the HOA used to intimidate had become evidence of their overreach. Lawyers, parents, and even former HOA board members began dissecting it online, calling it a textbook case of abuse of authority. And soon, other homeowners in the same community started speaking up. They shared their own experiences, unfair fines, petty warnings, and the fear of retaliation. The HOA president, once confident in his control, was now under national scrutiny. The letter that was supposed to silence one mother had instead given her, and many others, a voice. By the end of that week, the story had reached over 10 million views across platforms. The mother had become a reluctant symbol, not of rebellion, but of common sense. Her message was simple. Rules are meant to protect people, not punish them for being human. What started as a private notice had turned into a public reckoning. The HOA had drawn a line, but the people had erased it. And as pressure mounted, the next step for both sides became inevitable. Would the HOA back down, or double down? That answer would come next. When the video of the Florida mother and her 5-year-old son went viral, their quiet neighborhood was never the same. At first, the attention seemed harmless. A few supportive comments from strangers, messages like, "This is unbelievable," or "Stay strong, mama." But within hours, her phone buzzed relentlessly. Notifications, news calls, and social media alerts flooded in, turning her private struggle into a national conversation. Her son's laughter beneath the magnolia tree had become more than innocent play. It had become a symbol of resilience and defiance against an overreaching authority. What was once a simple act of childhood joy had sparked outrage and debate across platforms. People shared their own experiences of HOA fines and petty restrictions. One woman wrote she had been fined for leaving her garden gnomes outside. A father shared that his child's bike had been labeled a hazard. Suddenly, the mother's story was no longer just hers. It belonged to anyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of bureaucracy. National media picked up the story quickly. TV anchors debated it, journalists wrote editorials, and late-night comedians dramatized the letter from the HOA, exaggerating the cold, legalistic phrases like touching community flora to comic effect. Hashtags such as #LetKidsPlay and #HiganMad trended nationwide. Locally, neighbors gathered outside the HOA office with handmade signs. Touching trees isn't a crime. We pay fees, not fines. Let kids be kids. Inside the HOA office, blinds were drawn. The president, who had previously taken pride in strict enforcement, was now under intense scrutiny. Attempts to defend the letter by claiming it ensured fairness were met with public ridicule. Social media amplified every detail of the original notice, exposing its absurdity and turning it into a symbol of misplaced authority. The community, once silent out of fear, found courage. The mother's defiance had broken the silence, inspiring residents to question the rules that had long governed their lives without accountability. The mother, exhausted yet resolute, became the voice of reason. She participated in interviews calmly, stating, "My son didn't harm anyone or anything. He was just playing. If that's a violation, the rules are broken, not him." Her words resonated far beyond her neighborhood. Across the country, parents, homeowners, and ordinary citizens saw themselves in her story, standing up against rigid systems that valued rules over humanity. The backlash against the HOA intensified. Petitions circulated demanding accountability, and thousands signed online and in person. The board could no longer remain silent. Faced with overwhelming public pressure, the HOA withdrew the notice, canceled the legal fees, and promised to revise its enforcement policies. The president eventually resigned. For the first time in years, residents felt empowered. The story had achieved more than a victory over an unfair fine. It sparked a movement, reshaping conversations about power, rules, and fairness in communities nationwide. The Magnolia Tree, once a simple backyard feature, became a quiet symbol of resistance and freedom. People visited it, posting photos and leaving small handwritten notes on its branches. For every child who just wants to play. For every parent who spoke up. For every rule that forgot its purpose. A note written in a child's handwriting read simply, "Thank you for letting me touch the tree." It was a powerful reminder that even the smallest acts of courage, a mother standing up, a child playing, a tree standing tall, can inspire collective change. Experts weighed in, calling it a case study in the psychology of power, how authority, when unchecked, can easily become tyranny in miniature. HOAs, designed to maintain fairness, risk crossing a line when rules overshadow empathy. The story reminded millions that authority is legitimate only when guided by reason and compassion. Months later, life returned to a quieter rhythm. The child played under the magnolia tree, his laughter free and uninhibited. Yet the story lingered, not just in headlines or memes, but in the hearts of those who followed it. The mother reflected on the journey, realizing the impact of her stand. "We didn't win a fight. We reminded people how to be human." The story became a reference point for conversations about fairness, governance, and community rights. It demonstrated that change doesn't always begin in courtrooms or offices. Sometimes it begins with one voice, one act of courage, and the willingness to question authority. For millions, the Magnolia Tree Incident was more than a viral story. It was a lesson in humanity. Rules exist to serve people, not to dominate them. Authority exists to guide, not to intimidate. And silence in the face of injustice, no matter how small it seems, only gives power to the wrong hands. Under the same magnolia tree, life continued. Children played, birds perched on its branches, and the sunlight filtered through its leaves. But now it was more than a tree. It was a symbol of innocence protected, courage celebrated, and fairness restored. The mother's actions reminded America that sometimes the simplest, most human acts create the deepest impact. One mother, one child, and one tree had sparked reflection across a nation, leaving a legacy that would be remembered long after the story faded from headlines. And as the sun set over the Florida neighborhood, laughter rang out again under the magnolia, a quiet, enduring reminder that fairness, courage, and humanity can always prevail. The Magnolia Tree Incident wasn't just a story about a fine or a rule. It was about courage, empathy, and standing up for what's right. Sometimes the smallest voices, even the laughter of a 5-year-old, can spark the biggest change. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear that fairness still matters, and that one voice can make a world of difference.